Oh, no worries. Not a problem. Thank you so much for joining Andre and I in this. We were just chatting about your meta epic.
Oh yeah.
So,
My post it to Twitter and hope for the best epic.
yes, exactly. Yeah, so
Which actually got a lot of people to reply with. Yeah, it wasn't very organized.
Totally. Well, it's a good way to put it all together, but we just weren't really sure, So what we wanted to do today was bend your ear for about half an hour around this project. I've talked to Kenny about it a little bit. I've talked to Christy about it a little bit, but you and I and Andre have not gotten to talk yet. So the too long didn't read. I'll be the DRI from the research perspective, but Andre and I will be partnering together with this. So we're here to just find out what's all this about and what form has it taken now? Because I know you and I talked so many moons ago about some of this, and I think it's formed into something now that was different than when we first talked about it. So let's start at the top and talk about, like, how are you defining the adoption journey, and what is the lens or the lenses that you're looking at it through? So that'll help us to know.
I think it's actually fairly unknown at this point. We haven't really done any research into it to know what the right answer is. Tim, Orit, and Darren and Tao have all come up with their metric. And they largely did that independently, or not independently, but in working with the, I guess, the team that was rolling out the metrics and all of that. So it was very much aligned to that. And it wasn't necessarily based on, an understanding of the flow. We were kicking off that epic a few months ago. And that was kind of like my own personal take on what I thought, where I thought we could improve things. The two main paths, I guess I would say, to improving things are building features that help people, adopt GitLab who would otherwise be blocked. It's kind of an awkward way to say it, but it means like, if we're missing features that make it really hard for them to implement their pipeline definition, then they get blocked at some point and they're like, well, we can't grow with you anymore, or we have to put hacks in, or we couldn't even start with you. Like mobile is a good example of that, where already if you're doing mobile, from the very beginning, you're having to do some kind of strange things that are not so easy to do. So features that we released recently, like rules, child-parent pipelines, are all about that track, which is just kind of unlocking more complicated workflows and hopefully doing it in a way that's easy to understand. Then the other is what Mark Puntak was calling like the journey to your first green pipeline and trying to accelerate that. And that's what that get up and running quickly with GitLab CI epic is really all about. Is, a lot of times the first time you import a project or whatever, or even just start writing code and you make your first commit, one of the things that you got to do is kind of keep running pipelines until you get the first one to pass, and then you can like say, woohoo, like I've achieved something amazing here. And that's a feeling that people talk about on Twitter all the time. And it's like, wow, I got my first green build. And so it seems like something natural that we can align around. And so that's where that epic came from, was, I posted on Twitter and was talking to people all over the place and just saying, they're like, hey, do you remember what it was like getting your first green builds, or when you're first using GitLab, and how could we have made that more enjoyable, made you find the information you needed more quickly, help you find the solutions more easily, just make it a nicer experience and a guided experience. And so that epic came there, but then we got reprioritized just as we were about to start on that. Like all of the staffing changed and everything, and there was going to be a whole team dedicated to it, but then there wasn't anymore. And then it was like, well, no, actually don't work on that, work on the Jenkins importer. So it's basically just kind of like, I made all of that 3 or 4 months ago, maybe even longer now, time flies. But then it just sat there and is sitting in that same state. I've been continuing to add more items to it as I come across them, because I wanted us to get back there. But it's really still in the same place as the last time we talked about it. So there's those two tracks, and doing some research and having like a research partner to help validate some of that stuff I think would be great. I was I did this job doing build engineering, release engineering, that sort of thing for a long time. So I have my own perspective as a user, which is a good user perspective, but it's also just one. And so it still needs to be validated against how things are evolving and what our customers are looking for. And we've had some stumbles with some of the features we released recently, like rules, like still nobody understands it. And we're trying to figure out how to talk about the feature in a way that people can, like there's been 6 refactors of the documentation to try and make it clear, but I think and ultimately it was just a confusing, it was confusing from the start. And so we were trying to clean that up, and having some more research in there, I think probably could have helped that situation. So those are the threads that I'm thinking about.
Okay.
Did I miss anything in the question?
I don't think so. I'm just trying to think if, so
Sometimes
are
when I start
we,
talking, I forget like
yeah, oh no,
what
Jason, you're fine, you're fine. So okay, so we've got people who've never done CI before. That's your green pipeline people who are
I
keep
wouldn't
having to
necessarily
try
say
it
never
to
done
get it.
CI before. Probably most of them have done some kind of build before, but they've never done it with GitLab. And so they have to learn the GitLab quirks and get it working. But they probably, most people understand kind of like the general principles of a build system who would be trying to get something working. There is a smaller subset of users who've just like, I've never done a build before, and I wonder what that would be like, and I wonder what a build is. And we should validate actually how many of them there are. One of the interesting things about our product is that we're bringing in more people like designers and researchers and people who are setting up projects who work in, it's not like a software developer who just set up their own little thing. And so like, yeah, I mean, like, how could we help a designer get like some flow up and running without them already having to know what builds are?
Yeah, you know, that's come up in that. Now this is the 3rd time I've heard that persona, like that non-technical user, like, I shouldn't say non-technical, non-engineering user to use GitLab. And that's like the 3rd time it's come up in the past week. So that might be something that we dive into for this, because I don't know if we really have looked at it yet ever, other than like a side like a glance at it.
Makes sense.
In terms of other personas that you feel are important for this project, I assume like the software engineer, the DevOps engineer.
Yeah, it's really, for our personas, the way it lines up, it tends to almost always be the DevOps engineer, or the person, like for a smaller company, it'll be the software engineer, but it will be them with their DevOps engineer hat on, because it's the person who makes the build, which is typically not, you know, it's either a shared responsibility amongst everybody, or somebody happens to be good at it and they get it, or if they're just a little bit bigger than that, then there'll be somebody on the team whose responsibility is to keep the builds running. I guess there are 2 points of view, or 2 angles that you come at it. There's sort of setting up all of the wiring so that you know, builds get artifacts to the right place, they get deployed to the right place, test environments are set up, and then everybody sort of shares that same basic infrastructure related to the build system. But then there's also, you know, on an ongoing basis, if you're just an engineer, you still interact with the build system in small ways to say like, oh, hey, we have this new component we need to build, so I can probably wire that in. I don't need to go to the central build expert person to wire that in. So there's a little bit of both there. And so I guess, yeah, if you look at it that way, then we've got those 2, the software engineer and the DevOps engineer are the 2 creators, the 2 authors of pipelines.
Okay. And the DevOps engineer will have had done CI before, but maybe just not with GitLab, right? Okay.
Yeah, probably
and the
for
software
personal
engineer
projects is generally familiar with it. Maybe used Jenkins before, maybe used other tools, and sort of at least knows the concepts and kind of what they're getting into.
Gotcha. Okay. Who else?
Doesn't know all of the GitLab unique things. And one of the biggest challenges for people who are getting up to speed is that we've got really the page that you need to use to start understanding how to build a pipeline is the, what do we call it? The configuration reference, which just has every single keyword in like maybe 20 pages of and you just you search through the page, so you're kind of jumping around. It's not like you need to read it top to bottom, because it's more like an appendix than a doc. But we really need some kind of like layered approach, like or even a choose your own adventure kind of thing, where like here's like the 5 ingredients to make a basic CI pipeline. Start with these, and here's our list of things where you might go next. Like, are you doing Docker? Then go check out this page, and we'll tell you some of our cool features that relate to that. Are you doing Kubernetes? Check this out. Are you doing complex matrix builds? And we've got this interesting feature, but there needs to be like an onion that you peel the layers back on, because right now everybody starts at that page, and they can get through it and they learn a lot, and they come out the other end probably being pretty reasonable at writing, but it's very intimidating at the start. And also the other thing that people miss is easier ways to do things. Yeah, like we have keywords like parallel and stuff that, yeah, you sort of have to know about them in order to know them. And if you don't, then you might generate a bunch of jobs and write out all the YAML by hand, when in fact we have this parallel keyword that just says like, make 50 copies of this job. And so how are we effectively realizing that somebody intends to do that and then guiding them to the parallel keyword? Like, we're not doing a good job of that, other than to say like, hopefully they go to the reference and hopefully they think of the word parallel and they search on the page for it and it comes up with the parallel keyword. And then they're like, oh, cool, like I can use this. And I think that that's actually how most people find most CI YAML features is that way. Yeah, I would suspect that's probably true. Includes can also be complicated. We also don't have a good, we were just talking about this today in some super long thread, where we don't have a good kind of like test cycle. We have GitLab runner exec, but it's, I guess, not maintained anymore. So you can run pipelines that way, but there's a ton of limitations. The other way to do it is you just sort of have to keep checking a file in and then waiting for the pipeline to run on GitLab, and then look at the results and then check another update in. And you just kind of keep doing this iterative thing. And if we can speed that up, I think that would be a nice improvement as well. Because the delays can be long. If you're just making a small change, it can be like 5 minutes before you see the results. Whereas if you were able to just run it locally using GitLab runner exec, you could just get results instantly. And then some of the more advanced cases like includes, it's even just difficult to try and understand what happened. And we have rules as well, either only except or the actual rules keyword. And so those are, you can set up things like only run this job if there are changes on this certain file. So setting up tests for those kinds of things is not easy. And that's something else that we could do to make things easier. One feature we're coming out with soon is an improvement for the linter, where it will do better linting, and it will also give warnings. And we can use that to mention deprecations. We can use that to mention things like, hey, we noticed you've got like 20 jobs that all have basically the same name. Perhaps you intended to use the parallel keyword or something like that. And that can be a way for us to try and guide people to good features and better practices. And that's in 13.2, I think. So that's coming soon.
Yeah. And you mentioned Tao, Darren, and Ori earlier. Is Jackie also one of the PMs
Jackie
who's
is
working on this?
not really on the CI/CD domain. So she's got release management, which is connected.
Yeah.
But it's not really that core kind of CI/CD flow.
Okay. So it's just the 3 of them then that make up the core piece of it.
Yeah, I think so. But everybody's sort of got features that touch on it.
Yeah, I know. That's one of the things that we wanted to understand, like who are our stakeholders of the project. I'm assuming you are our DRI for it, but if there are other people we wanted to make sure that we check in with, we talk to.
Yeah, I think if we're posting results in like the ops section channel, then we're covering everybody. Like if we post updates there, then everybody will get a chance to see it and join in the fun if they want to.
Gotcha. Thinking about other things. Okay, so all the things that are in the meta epic are all the things that you kind of just went over like all these improvements that we can make to help people have an
Yeah.
easier time using it, adopting to it based on whatever they've used before, and then pushing that usage past the lower level to the higher level, more complex pipelines, more complex usage to get them to stay, right?
Yeah, the latter is not in that epic. That's in, there is an epic for child parent pipelines, an epic for rules, and an epic for the DAG. And those are on, those are linked to on the direction page down at the bottom under the vision section. But they have their own.
Yes, the DAG does. Yes.
Yeah, the DAG has its own epic, yeah. And that's correct. I would say that I've just sort of been tagging that epic onto anything that seems like vaguely related, with the thinking that we would probably come back to at some point and prioritize all the items and maybe clean it up and merge things, and there's duplicates in there and stuff. So that needs to be done. And then also the comments in there, I would say are, it's just, you could almost look at it as just like a database of responses to the question, like, how would you make GitLab easier to use? At least, between 6 months ago and 4 months ago, that 2 months, it was just people adding responses there.
Yeah.
So some of those probably need issues created. It all needs to be kind of read through and summarized and made sense of. And we can follow up with those people as well if we have more questions. It has been a really nice group to follow up with and ask questions.
Oh, good. Are you looking to get any sort of prioritization from us with that list of stuff?
Not necessarily directly, not like, put some data in a box and then prioritization comes back out. But I think the results of the research will inform prioritization for sure. Because I don't know what to work on next there. I think that there's probably safe places to start. It's not like we need to know perfect information before we can start making any improvement. But on the other hand, some kind of voting might be interesting to do. Like, find the themes in the issues because they're not grouped in any way right now. And then maybe just poll all those users in the thread and look at their responses and say, like, which of these themes for issues seems to line up that's going to make the most difference for people, and then maybe try and start moving on some of those. So in that way, the research would help with prioritization.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Andre, what questions do you have for Jason?
I wanted to ask about the other stages that could be involved or are currently involved in that issue that Kenny created. He was talking about it as a cross-stage project between source code management and ops, basically. So what other stakeholders might be involved? Perhaps some people from Create, maybe someone from Growth. I know that Growth team has on their page exactly CI adoption related projects. Who do you think might be relevant?
So that's a great point I meant to mention earlier, but I totally forgot. The Growth team has been doing really interesting things in helping people start using CI, which sort of touches on that. There's been some small overlap. They're not really helping people understand CI really, but they're prompting people to take a look at CI, which is sort of the first step towards, and they're doing things like linking to documentation and things. So there's a small overlap there. So I think coordinating with them a little bit is good too. And they may have some perspective, because the goal of all of this is to drive more users over the stage. Specifically, the goal here is to drive more, I would say, usage of Verify. And then we get downstream benefits from that in various places. Then the Growth team can help us with that. The related stages that you were asking about, I think the ones that are most closely related, I was actually surprised to hear you say source code management, although Kenny may have something in mind that I'm not thinking of, in which case we should just double check that and figure out what Kenny was talking about. But the ones that I see, like Verify is center stage, because that's where the features are that we're mostly going to be updating. But downstream from there are Configure for auto DevOps, and kind of like how they relate to setting up your environment and the infrastructure that goes with it. can be part of that initial setup and getting working in CI. Like a lot of times when you're setting up your CI, you're setting up your environments as well. The CD stage as well, so release or REITs part in particular, where you're setting up deployments to environments using potentially auto DevOps as well, or whatever, like however you're deploying to your environments, that can be all part of that same motion. Those are probably the two most directly connected downstream ones. And then beyond that, we've got like monitor in ops, which is downstream from release. You know, if we're not deploying to their environment, if they haven't set up their environment, then we have no way to monitor it. But if both of those things are happening, then we can connect in monitoring and show people really cool things. Hopefully that answers your question a bit.
Yeah, sure. So the part about create and the source code management, we will probably ask Kenny about what he meant.
Or we can check the issue too if it's documented in there. It's just I'm not familiar with it. I'm not doubting it. I just I'm not recognizing the topic.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And yeah, I know that Sid mentioned that also during our UX research group conversation. So I was curious about if there is somebody from leadership involved in this project, if they have some expectations from it.
Not as far as I know. Everybody's always involved. It's always involved in a good way. No, I don't think so. I think this is just what we need to do to be successful for the team. So it's being driven from there. Kenny's interested. He's of course a leader in the company, but he's not C-level. But no, I don't, like, if you're asking, do we need to give updates to any like e-group members? I don't think so. But maybe Kenny. Okay. No. I'm sure Kenny will watch this video actually, so he can shout out to us if he hears this and knows something I don't.
Good. I hope he does. Yeah, Sid mentioned during our UX research group conversation last week, he was curious about the part it was the stuff that Darren's been working on with the runners and purchasing, like, hey, I need this runner. Let me just whip out my credit card. I'll just buy it right now so I can use it, like on demand, but purchase on demand maybe. And so is that, when you mentioned Darren, is that the part that you're mentioning him for?
Yeah, that would be part of this as well. Yeah, and I didn't do a good job of covering that element of it, but
that's all right.
That's not in that CI epic that I have. That I've shared with you, but Darren has his own make runner easier to use epic, and it's improved the way you can deploy the runner to a managed Kubernetes instance recently. It's got in-product guidance for how to set it up in Docker and do other things. Maybe he's going to eventually work on the GitLab runner exec as well. But he's also got like the runners as a service thing that he's investigating, and yeah, that one is a CEO interest item. And on Darren's side, there are a couple other ones as well that are CEO interest. Probably the one that you might be able to tie into this is like Mac and Windows runners and making those good, and maybe Mac runners in particular because it enables mobile builds. You can really only build iOS apps on Mac build machines. So that's a requirement. And some of the hacks that you have to do that I was talking about earlier for mobile users, if you've got a mobile app, is all around like setting up your Mac build machine and how kind of tricky. It's not tricky, but it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like, once you do it, you're like, oh, okay, I guess that made sense. But when you're trying to figure it out, it's often weird. And there's not a recipe for it because everybody's build environment is a little bit different, and you have to use real hardware because there's no such thing as like a virtualized Mac. And so you're dealing with like plugging things in and exposing them to the internet. And so you got all these steps that you got to do. And there's companies out there that offer managed Macs in the cloud. And so maybe there's something there. But yeah, Darren is doing research on a bunch of those areas, and that should be part of this as well as we think about the big picture.
Yep. Cool. Anything else we should know that we didn't ask you already?
Probably.
Oh, I'm sure we'll probably
Yeah.
talk again. But
You probably get a sense I can just like go on and on and on in various different directions about this topic.
yeah.
We should probably just yeah, pick some next steps and just start moving in one area or the other. I like Darren, I feel like has a really good handle on his area, and it doesn't need a ton of attention because he's already prioritizing it. Not that it doesn't need research, but we don't, what I'm saying is we don't necessarily have to start there. Where I would like to start is on that big epic and trying to just kind of like make sense of it in some way and find out, you know, from a UX research side, like what assumptions are in there, where should, what are some good questions we could ask, and maybe like the next step is to do some kind of survey or customer contact out of that epic and say, hey, you know, we're coming back around to this. Here's all the issues that we found, and here are the themes that we found in them. Here's all the comments that were in there, and here's the themes and the comments that we found. You know, how would you, where would you like us to start, considering all these things, like, you know, and talk to some people and do some good research in that way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I think we should also get with Ori and Darren and Tao to get those metrics that they've set up. They'll point me to their pages, I'm sure, but I just don't have them.
There's an
on
ops
hand.
like summary page now as well. I was just looking at this morning.
Oh, okay.
All of the metrics for all of Kenny's teams in one place in the handbook somewhere.
Yeah, they're all organized. I just, like the handbook is just massive, and I just don't even pretend to know where anything is anymore. I just ask people.
It's been a lot of change in that spot lately, but it seems.
Yes. I saw that yesterday. Yeah, totally. Okay, so I think that's where we'll start. We'll start with them. We may even talk with them too, in addition to like we did with you.
Maybe we should have, maybe another good next step is just kind of like get everybody together and have a quick kickoff of some kind. And
yeah.
Maybe we need a collaborative space as well. I don't know. I'm totally open to whatever UX research approach other groups are using. Otherwise, I'll just do whatever I do anyway, and it will work. But it may not be the most efficient. And so I'm happy to be informed and led a little bit when it comes to figuring out the UX research stuff.
Yeah, no worries, Susan. Yeah, I think what Andre and I need to do is put our heads together now that we got a chance to talk with you and got some more context around that epic and got a lot more information than we had before. And then we'll come up with a plan. And I love the idea of a big group kickoff and having a place for us all to kind of talk about this. Nobody else is doing it yet. This is like the biggest first strategic kind of situation we've got going on that crosses groups and things. So we can be pioneers and we can try new things out. So it'll be fun.
Maybe let's also post this video into the ops section channel and just say, hey, if anybody's interested, you can let us know, and then you can come to our kickoff, and we'll see if anybody joins up.
Yep. Sounds good. And Andre's going to be out next week, and then we're getting July 4th going this week here in the States. So we'll probably do the kickoff when Andre gets back from his vacation.
Okay.
So
if there's anything I can do in the meantime, just let me know.
Oh, I will. I will. Believe me, I will. I'll ping you in the issue.
Okay, sounds great.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.